computer.
Got it.
Hi, I'm here today with Samuel F. Reynolds. He's making a wonderful return engagement to the Florida Atlantic chapter of the NCGR, and we're very happy to have him back, even if he's back virtually rather than actually. Sam, refresh my memory. When were you last a speaker for our group?
It had to have been 2019, I think. I think, yeah.
It seems so much more recent to me, but we were all actually there in the room at the college.
I want to say maybe it was 2020. I mean, did I do a talk? It sounds awful.
Well,
I think I did a talk before going on the cruise. But maybe not. But
I don't think so, because I saw Demetri George came down for the South Florida Astrological Association in February. And
so
I just
maybe it was 2019.
It was 2019. And what did you speak on to refresh our viewers?
I think that was the predictive astrology workshop that I did. The workshop. Mm-hmm.
It was wonderful. So let me ask you, what is the topic of your upcoming talk for our organization?
We're going to be talking about electional astrology, and it's kind of learning to do, having the rudiments, a little more of working with electional astrology.
All right. Which should you learn first, horary or electional?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say I learned, wow, I think they were simultaneous as I was learning horary from one teacher in New York who studied with Zoltan Mason.
Wow, you went to the source. What year would this?
Oh, no, I didn't study with Zoltan. I studied with someone who studied with Zoltan. His name is Vlad Shilinis. And I also read some of the heavyweights. But then I studied electional astrology through Christopher Warnick's course.
I would love to take that course.
Mm-hmm.
How long was that course?
It's as long as you want it.
Oh, it was a self-study course.
Yeah,
all right.
It's a self-study course.
Fantastic. He has a great body of work. What got you interested in electional astrology in the first place? Did someone ever elect a chart for you, or was it just you realized it was a very pragmatic thing to know how to do? I know often someone will request I do a type of astrology, and that's why I end up studying it.
Well, I got into medieval astrology circa 2000. Well, it started with Robert Zoller's course, also online self-study course in 2001. And then the natural growth of my interest in medieval astrology coupled with an interest in magic. So at the time, I was interested in magic. I don't practice in the astrological magic generally.
Which has become a very hot topic, as we know.
It is very
among the
hot,
younger
and
astrologers.
I have my own reasons, which we could go into, why I don't practice magic, and it's nothing bad against magic or even magic practitioners. I think it's just not my trajectory.
In this lifetime.
Yeah, it's not my trajectory by necessity. You know, I can go into that, but I think what got me more into electional was magic.
And you know what? It is such a part of magic, electing the time, you know.
Or talisman and other kinds of work, or when to, you know, so I also started using it for sending out emails. And I mean emails for garnering business. I don't mean like,
I understood what you
start
meant.
back. Okay, let me check. What hour is it? I didn't do it for that.
Did you have a history of working with planetary hours in the past before? Was that something you made use of?
No.
Yeah. All right.
Not before I got into electional.
Amazing. I think you told me you've been teaching an electional astrology class ongoing the last couple of months. Is that right?
I have. Well, it's been horary that then bleeds into electional because I think they're related. So, you know, I decided to combine the two, and I started, this is nitty gritty 3. So I have a module of now 3 classes. And I started my most advanced class, probably nitty gritty 3, electional and horary. I probably started it now 3 years ago.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if people want information on these classes, they go to your...
Unlockastrology.com.
All right. And how many classes in each module? How many actual classroom sessions are there?
12.
12. So these are 3-month courses, basically.
Correct.
All right. Good to know. All right. Well, I think we'll start off with this leading question. Are you old enough to remember the television show Candid Camera?
I am.
So you remember that the theme song went, when least expected, you're elected, it's your lucky day, smile, you're on Candid Camera. So do you think it's possible to elect a lucky time when you're in the middle of one of those periods, like heavy outer planet transits? Do you think electional astrology can help us ameliorate these
Absolutely.
periods of our lives?
It can mitigate, ameliorate, I think. But the only thing that I would say it can't do, and we might want it to, but it can't necessarily, skirt around sometimes the difficult times, but can find where you might find some measure of a, peace with it. And it also does depend related to your natal chart.
Yes.
So you can't, one of the rules related to electional astrology and horary astrology is that if there is a radix, you don't trump the radix. And even with electional astrology, you could use a horary chart as a radix, right? For someone who doesn't know their birth date or birth time, which was common in the classical era, not to even know your birth date.
So you would use the horary chart as a birth chart?
You would use it as a radix chart, as a rooted chart,
right,
by which you can do an election. So with that in mind, one of the key rules is that you can't trump that radix chart, whether it's a horary chart or a natal chart. And what that means, if it isn't in the stars or the cards, for you to be a quote unquote millionaire, but only be a thousandaire, then to try to elect a chart when you're going to win millions, that may be harder.
It's hard
right?
work. I know. I've tried using the David Beasley Uranian astrology method. Still waiting.
Right. So what you might be able to do is net those thousands, net those hundreds. So it becomes a way in which you improve your financial condition somewhat, but not to the level of excess that you might, aspire, which is like, I want millions, billions, whatever. That's not necessarily going to happen.
Right. If it's not promised by the chart, the birth chart, it's probably not happening. Give me an example, if you would. Let's say I don't know when I was born, and would I ask a question of, will I buy a new car, or what type of horary question could we use as a root chart to build on with an election?
That's a good one. So let's say, like, will I get this? Will I get a nice computer? So what we might say is, look at the chart, see if there's testimony for you getting a nice computer, whatever that might mean. And then using either the ascendant, using the moon, right? Possibly even the sun, we could use that as a root, depending on the condition of the ascendant ruler, the moon.
From the horary chart, we'd use those.
We can use the horary chart as a route for election, in terms of when you might actually go get this computer, if the horary chart supports that.
Very cool. I'm glad I'm going to be at your workshop now. Maybe you'll go into this a little bit. How can we use electional astrology as a form of spiritual discipline? And I mean by that, to avoid our temper, our fears of doing the wrong thing, choosing the wrong moment, or electing to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. I mean, I know it's easy to get a little obsessed when you're trying to elect something and you have this anxiety that you're not going to do the election right. How do you deal with this issue yourself personally? Does it ever?
I think
hover
what's
around you?
interesting,
Yeah.
well, first, let me say, as you just said, I think it is normal and natural with nearly every form of astrology on first and early encounters to overdo it. You know, you learn horary, everything becomes a horary. You learn, you know, most people start off with natal astrology. Everything becomes like a chance to look at astrology. You astrologize everywhere. So there's no exception with electional. But I think sometimes the real wisdom of electional astrology is knowing when not to elect something, right? It's kind of more so where you are open to the moment and you greet it contemplatively, um, prayerfully, however you think about it, right? And why I mention it that way, kind of to follow up on something I mentioned earlier, this is one of the reasons why I don't perform magic on a routine basis anymore. I most recently had to use electional magical astrology. Um, but generally I don't. Now I have to be responsible and like, well, why did you use it? Well, my Instagram account was hacked.
Oh no.
It was hacked just last month. And Instagram was not initially very helpful. And
Are they owned by Facebook?
yes.
Oh, well, that's your
Yeah.
answer. Yes.
Although, you know, it's interesting. I think Facebook probably is a little more, you know, active, but Instagram wasn't initially very helpful. Long story short, and the urgency I had wasn't so much like I have to get my account back, my identity. The person who took over my account, he was fleecing people, and I had two people, one a student, write me, who actually, you know, trusted me, not realizing it wasn't me, and gave this person money.
I mean, he was asking people for money. Was he doing a
He was
narrative
fleecing
like
people.
I lost my wallet in Europe and
Well, no, it was like he actually took over my account and started peddling cryptocurrency.
oh
And
no.
so, and people were like, oh, wow, Sam is into cryptocurrency, blah, blah, blah. So I had an extra sense of urgency. So I did a reverse candle spell, and I did it on a Wednesday. Couldn't necessarily do it during a Mercury hour. I did it during a sun hour. And the sun, even though it was in detriment, actually, I think it was still, no, it was before it was going into detriment. It was going before going into Aquarius. So I took advantage of it. Mercury was not retrograde at that particular point. So I took advantage of that particular moment using some also oil. And within 2 hours, I had my account back.
Amazing.
Right. So,
Well,
yeah, go on.
no, I feel you were totally justified from what you're telling me. So
Yeah.
now that you get
So
my
I got my
benediction.
account back. You know, and that's another story in terms of how I dealt with my hacker. Tantalizing, but I was a true Scorpio sun. But you know, that's an example of that. But to answer your question, in terms of spiritual practice, it can be, you know, electing is more so being in alignment and seeking alignment,
As opposed to trying to
seek
force
control.
intentionality onto the cosmos. Right.
Yeah, it's at its best is kind of finding the pathway toward alignment, and that can be when you elect to, you know, honor particular deities if that's your thing, or honor a deity. You know, one of the things that's interesting, even Islamic prayer is a form of election. You're like, how? Well, it's particular times during the day where, in relation to the sun, and not necessarily planetary hours, where you're honoring particular aspects of your experience of life. You know, whether we're talking about Fajr, which is just before daybreak, or you're talking about midday as the sun is just passing the midheaven, or you're talking about as the sun is going into the 8th house. Like these actually do correlate using quadrant-based houses with different aspects of honoring the divine, right?
Amazing.
So
We
that's
want you back for another lecture on that. Yes.
so yeah, so that's another example where you can use the planetary hours that way. You can actually use, particular ingresses, aspects of return, and that becomes more contemplative rather than thinking like it has to be exclusively predictive. And the most common way in which we think about this is the solar return, and where we might also even think to elect where we might have it, which also dictates when we might have it.
Which is a form of alignment, ultimately, isn't it? And our people can do it. They can practice on their lunar returns, right? Yes.
Exactly. So I think for spiritual alignment, I think sometimes what's overlooked in some elements of modern astrology is more the contemplative consideration. Like the word consider actually comes from Latin for considere, which means to think with your stars. Right. So election becomes one particular powerful way where you learn to think with your stars.
Right. So you're trying to go with the flow consciously. So this is great. So you're not actually trying to bend the universe to your will, which never really seems to work out quite the way we want.
And there's actually, even the other way you can think about it is that the context by which you might elect to do something, whether it's accidental or direct, really influences it. So one of the charts that we're going to look at is what I think, based on what I've been able to reconstruct, I don't have the exact time, is the marriage of Paul Newman with Joanne Woodward.
Right.
And if you look at roundabout, not just the date, but the time they may have gotten married, if an astrologer elected that chart, I would say, you need to fire that astrologer and get your money back if you paid money. But the nature of how they got married for that particular chart fits the condition,
of the marriage?
The marriage, meaning that, well, not even just the marriage, but the wedding. It was basically, it sounds like it was on the spur wedding. They got married in Vegas. And so Uranus is, I think, rising. Venus is retrograde in Aquarius. There's a number of things wrong with the chart, but it fits in a sense that if it had been planned or trying to be controlled a certain way, I think that chart might have augured what we could say is something horrible related to the wedding, which would have complicated the marriage. But it fits what they did. And so I think that's another way to understand election.
Like, and I was going to ask you that, because the only electional astrology I really remember is the old rule: make the electional chart look like what you're trying to accomplish.
Boom. Exactly. So you have to be clear on your intention.
Wow, amazing.
And then, when you are not clear, then also it doesn't always mean that it becomes a worst case scenario. I have another example of that, an unintentional election from just last year around this time, where I had a kidney stone and I had to go into the hospital while the moon was in Libra.
That's breaking the rule, right?
Well, that I'll give a spoiler. The spoiler is that, I had to pray, because I was like, I knew the rule, and I knew, like, trying to perform a procedure while the moon is in the sign that of the body part that you're attempting to address, even surgically or even medically, however you're thinking to do it, or even just by treatment, is asking for a problem. Well, sure enough, there was a complication. They couldn't get the stone.
No kidding.
Right? They couldn't get the stone that day, that time. And so I had to wait a week. It was kind of scary, because when I woke up, I had a nephrostomy bag. So I was like, did they take out the kidney? Right? And no, they just put it in so they could take some some of the swelling down and the inflammation by virtue of its infection.
There's that famous scene from a Ronald Reagan movie where he wakes up and says, "Doc, where's the rest of me?" Right? It's like one of those moments.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't know. Is that a war movie where he had lost his legs or something?
I'm pretty sure he loses his legs in it. I couldn't tell you
Okay.
what movie it is. Wow.
Okay. Well, yeah, I didn't know that particular, but I had that scary. But yeah, that's an example where, you know, the moon as one of the key vehicles of understanding intention is reflected in what we have. And then I'll have other examples. You know, I've been thinking a lot. My major in college was PR, public relations. And one of the things I think about, and I will kind of compile some examples, is looking at things in relation to scandals, you know, when things are more likely to come to light, when things kind of go more into the dark, you know. So I think it's, again, going back to intentionality, and then awareness related to that.
Cool. Let me ask you this. Is it true that the part of fortune is the electional astrologer's friend?
I think so. I mean, the lot of fortune is so instrumental in all of medieval astrology and even some Hellenistic astrology. And, you know, I've kind of come to the call, because the lot of fortune, just to clarify for some folks, isn't like where you're lucky, right? Not classically. That's not the thought behind it. It's where I would say it's, you know, we could call it a vortex of confluence where things kind of cluster around, almost like.
Could you repeat that? A vortex?
A vortex of confluence where things kind of come together and cluster around. Where we could say that a lot of spirit is more like a vortex or locus of control, where we seek to have assertion of our will, whereas a lot of fortune is more so where things kind of gather and come around, which may be out of your control. And why that's significant is that the lot of fortune actually becomes the most unique significator in your chart. Like that should be the ascendant. Well, what could be more unique than taking your ascendant, the actual position of your sun, and the actual position of your moon as like a complete reflection of the moment? So it's actually, because you could have the same ascendant for any number of people, but you're not necessarily going to have the same position of the sun and moon at that same particular time.
Absolutely. And in the Uranian system of astrology, the sun represents the day when we're looking at timekeeping. The moon is the hour. And while the midheaven is actually the moment, as we know, the ascendant is also the moment.
So it becomes this unique reflection of it. So yes, I would say it is important to pay attention to the lot of fortune, but the moon becomes more the key reflector and variable factor in terms of talking about elections.
Do you work much with the antisha of the moon in electional?
Yes, I work with antisha for everything.
Okay, great. Will you be telling us anything about it, antisha, in your workshop?
I think I'll have a few examples.
Okay, great.
Or an example.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think we have the moral right or imperative to interfere with the flow of the cosmos, to just decide we're going to elect this time? There's another philosophical viewpoint that says maybe just let it happen. And I guess the metaphor I would bring to you is that, let's say it's snowing outside, it's snowing heavily, and your car doesn't have snow tires. Well, it's pragmatic to decide, I'll go to the supermarket tomorrow or the next day when it's not snowing. Can we draw a parallel between a practical decision like that and a more abstract desire or decision to elect a time to do something?
Yes, I think, you know, I was saying, you probably have heard me say this before, fate has two arms and one of them is your own.
Oh, I like that.
Astrology is really more so learning how to work that arm you can work, which doesn't mean you can work everything. You just kind of can work what you have. And so to answer your question, if I, you know, there's a circumscribed amount of latitude. I mean, one of the challenges of the modern visions of astrology is kind of like we've had like the crowning of free will, not recognizing that free will isn't exactly free, right? There's always some commensurate measure cost from dealing with, you know, the idea of one's will.
For every
And
action, there's an equal and opposite
the
reaction,
reaction.
right?
And
Yes.
then also there's a culmination of many actions that then delimit, you know, the nature of your quote unquote free will. Then we won't even get into some of the neurological scientific arguments that are steadily questioning how much free will do we actually have. Like when the one thing is we know now, the moment that I decided to pick up this watch, right, was actually not decided the moment I picked up the watch, but many seconds before I even picked up the watch. So when did I decide to do that? And what compelled me to decide to do that? Right?
Have you read the work of John Sellers by any chance?
No, I read some work from Sam Harris, who hates astrology. But
Wait, the you know, the men's rights person a long time, Fire in the Belly, is that him?
I don't know if he wrote Fire in the Belly.
Okay.
He is the new atheist.
Okay.
He's one of the new atheists. But anyway, I think ultimately, I don't know if we are in the position to kind of trump the idea of fate or set conditions, but we can definitely find what might be optimal within a certain time frame or a particular moment, which is what we're doing astrologically. So
well,
go on.
Let me give you an example that's very apropos. It was a bad job of electional on my part. And what had happened is I was trying to elect the time to join a new gym. I think this was in about the year 2000, and a new gym had opened. And I guess I was trying to elect a time where I wouldn't blow it off, right? Where I'd really, you know, go and I couldn't find a chart that didn't have a particular negative influence. And in this case, it was a trans-Neptunian point. And no matter what time I chose, you know, it just kept making its appearance, ruining the pattern I was looking for. So finally I decided, okay, I'll just take the least objectionable one. And I joined the gym. Well, within 6 months, the gym was closed for building violations. They hadn't gotten the proper permits or something. And then it was closed it was going to be renovated. And you know, that gym never reopened. And I was never able to make use of that membership. So I was swimming against the tide that day, right? So I try not to do electional for things like that anymore. Although you're old enough like me to remember that moment in Star Wars where, you know, Luke is flying over the Death Moon and he hears the voice, Luke, use the Force. You'll know when to do it, right? You'll know when to drop the bombs, the missiles. And, you know, I wonder sometimes to what extent the logical rules of electional interplay with our own natural intuition. How much does your intuition affect your practice of electional?
Most times, and then other times it's going to be just the nature of my schedule, right? You know, so I think, and then again, we have to be honest about how we decide to elect things, which may not just always be about astrology. It could be about, you know, some of the energy related to the day. And when I say the energy related to the day, you know, like I got married on the day after Eid, in Ramadan, you know, the end of Ramadan. You might say like, well, you know, but your marriage ended. Yeah, but after 9 years, right? Because we have been like trying to figure out when can we get elect a date to get married and blah, blah, blah. So it was an auspicious day spiritually from the tradition in which we were participating as Muslims at the time. So I think there's different ways in which you can tease out significance, which is what we're ultimately looking for. And that can be related to your intuition, that can be related to your sense of culture. What kind of draws some measure of, key significance. I think, for you, even personally, or things that you may not even be aware of. How many times do you stumble on a date, you do something and you realize like, oh, yeah, this is something that relates to something I did 14 years prior, or something else. So, and then there's body memory. One thing, when we think it's just like intuition, just spiritually, like a friend of mine was just talking about how she had been feeling down and low in energy and was kind of baffled by it until she remembered that she was coming up on the anniversary of her dear sister's death.
Yes.
We
so do best have a somatic memory. Yeah.
There's ways in which the body knows things, and that's a negative example, but there are also positive examples where you feel the key charge of energy. So we have to kind of, I always think of my job as an astrologer, which means I would say also for astrology, and this is something I learned from studying Kabbalah for a number of years, is it's a stand-in for Tiferet until that person can occupy that space. So it's kind of where we learn to, be able to step into that throne of power, that throne of grace, by which we can, see and enact things. But sometimes because we get so fettered by our humanity, by mundane things, we can't, or we don't see those things. So electional becomes a way by which to contemplate and work with these energies and things, but that doesn't necessarily mean all things must be subjected to them. There are other ways in which we can talk about them somatically, intuitively, spiritual direction, where we hear the voice. Use the force, Luke. Right?
Well, let me ask you this, because if I can remember what I was just about to ask you, I guess I'll ask you that in a little while. So Wendy Stacy did some really interesting work tracking scheduled cesarean births.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't scheduled by electional considerations, by doctors wanting to deliver the children at times that were convenient for them. You have the idea of the small town doctor. We've all have that image in our movie, the doctor that is woken up in the middle of the night and has to put, a coat on over his pajamas. Mrs. Johnson, her twins are arriving. And what Wendy found, I wish I could remember the name of this paper, I'll have to ask her, is so many births are being scheduled as cesareans, not for medical reasons, but for reasons of convenience for the medical establishment. And the worst offending countries are the UK, England, Brazil, and I believe Japan, that is actually starting to create a difference in the statistical distribution of the sun in all 12 signs. And it made me wonder, can we imagine, first of all, it's kind of a spooky thing as an astrologer to realize maybe we won't be getting too many 5th house and 6th house clients if this keeps up. People that are born between 2 and 6 in the morning or 3 and 6 in the morning. No, I'm getting that wrong. Let's see. Well, we won't have as many clients born in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
But what
or
if
after 5 o'clock?
Right. What if we lived in a world where instead of electing cesareans for what time the tee off is for the doctor at the nearest luxury golf course, what if we had doctors that might elect cesareans if there had to be a cesarean for, say, they're going to wait until Venus is on the ascendant and Jupiter is on the midheaven? Can we imagine this kind of world?
We of course could imagine it. but I don't know if that would necessarily really be as auspicious or good for us as we might think. You know, what's interesting about thinking about decent placements, when we're talking about a human life, you know, natal chart, and trying to improve circumstances, we have to also consider, like, well, as much as that may sound good for us and feel good for us as, you know, potential parents, these particular things, what might that mean in the long term for us, and for that child? And what I mean specifically is that we tend to romanticize the good bits, you know, like trines and essential dignities. You know, we want a Venus strong. But what I have found in my years of studying, it's the squares, it's the challenging aspects, it's the debilitated planets that make us stronger. That now, that doesn't mean we want to elect debilitated planets or squares in relation to elections related to moments in our lives. But to kind of do that for a child or do that for individuals, I think we're running into dangerous territory. I saw something on Twitter, kind of that, where they were talking about Wendy's research, or I don't think they even realized it was Wendy's research. They were just talking about more babies being born during the day or being, you know, in a diurnal sect. And they were talking about really how, well, one, I don't think they use this word, but I have to play on it, how woke we are, one. And then two, also, we might notice how this also might signify how amped we are, you know, like amped as a civilization where, you know, we have now the steady growth of the 24-hour news cycle. People have to kind of be active and social, always above the horizon, which is kind of the notion of the diurnal sect. So kind of dealing with the inner worlds, you know, the nocturnal realm is not something that we're as adroit about.
This is a brilliant correlation. Thank you. I'd never considered it in that light.
Yeah, so I think that is really something for us to kind of think about. Like, I wouldn't advise doing that, you know, even if doctors came to that level of expertise, as maybe we used to, because then we haven't even taken into account, like, will that be good for the mother? I mean, can we weigh, you know, like, you know, it might be good for the child, but would this be an auspicious time for the mom?
Well, 2 quick points. One, we all know women who have decided they wanted their child to be born in the next sign, and it's like 2 hours until, like, the sun changes sign, and, you know, no, I want a Libra, not a Virgo, right? And they hold the baby in because there wasn't a medical emergency. It sounds like an extreme case, but I've actually had several female astrologers tell me they did this. You know, they engaged in that.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the converse is also true, where people don't want particular kinds of children. Well, I mean, it's similar. Like, I don't want a Virgo, I want a Libra.
Right.
But I know, it again, dealing with the shadow, the nocturnal realm of our lives. I remember a quick story, because I don't know how long we're going, but
just have 2 more questions. So you're doing
okay.
Great.
All right. So I remember one time, it was August, and I was talking to a mother who was due soon. I didn't know how soon. And she's like, well, I can't stand Libra men. That's what she said. And I was like, why? And she's like, there's this, that, this, and that, and the other. Don't remember her laundry list. And I was like, oh, okay. So how far along are you? Oh, I'm 8 months. I'm gonna have a baby next month in September. When? I don't know, maybe earlier in the month or later in the month, I'm not sure. Do you know the baby's sex yet? Oh yeah, I'm gonna have a boy. I was like, you do realize that you could end up and probably will end up with a Libra man child, right? So it's almost as if the cosmos doesn't hear no. It's kind of like when people say, I don't want to date any more Geminis. It's almost like the cosmos hears like, oh, this one, more Geminis. They want Geminis, right? And I think people also have these aversions, not recognizing where we started, the idea of going with the flow or trying to improve your situation. If you have like a bed with springs that kind of go into your back, there are things that you might be able to buy and put on top of it to ameliorate your situation, or a kind of pillow rather than just going out and buying a new bed. So you can think of sometimes electional astrology along that spectrum where we're trying to improve given situations, not that you can completely wholly change them or have the power of full aversion. So,
Well, let me end this on a note. Well, I also wanted to mention a lot of people believe, of course, our moment of birth is the soul's choice. So, as electional astrologers, we really don't want to interfere with the soul's choice. And then we have the additional problematic concept that some people believe all things are happening simultaneously. We just can't perceive it as such. That if there truly is no such thing as time and all things are happening actually at the same time in the same place, we're talking here on a very
esoteric level. Yeah.
Esoteric level. Well, then I'm not sure it would make a difference. Your electional chart, if we go deep enough, right? So we've talked a lot of abstractions. Let me ask you, what type of are you going to be teaching our workshop attendees any particular types of elections, like when to buy a house or
a car? We're going to talk about particular things like, those particular things, like business. More of the questions that most people have, when to start a business, talking about surgeries,
all right,
or
good.
medical procedures, emails, correspondence, these particular things that we are seeking to do, when you might even want to serve someone, hey, those are important. You're talking about Florida. It is a litigious state, I think I understand.
There's a very famous story in Florida. Another astrological organization was having problems. So when someone from that organization was speaking at our group, and they knew she would be speaking at that time, they brought in someone to serve the papers on her during the workshop. So they just couldn't get to her any other way. So
it's a very litigious state. So is New York, right? So it's a little different. Yeah.
Do you ever work backwards? You have an event, you look at a receipt, you look at what time you bought something, or you have a time that you didn't elect, but then you go back and evaluate it and see what type of time it was according to the rules of election?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's instructive to kind of go back and look at key moments in your life or dates or all kinds of things that are of key significance. I don't do it, like when I bought my groceries. That goes into the realm of but there are people who elect to do a lot of things. I expect, like I said, I mentioned it where it's new, but I know some astrologers who may not do particular, we changed the time for our meeting, right? I didn't elect it. But there may have been an astrologer, or there are astrologers who would elect, was this the best time to have this? And I think that goes along with, I don't know if I went into this, why I don't do magic as much anymore, because I wanted to learn more of the lessons of surrender.
Yes.
I wanted to learn more of the lessons, and I don't mean to surrender to, the fates, whatever you will, but prayer, more so of trust, rather than kind of just being beholden to control.
So trust in this case is a form of surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, now there are moments where, yeah, I may not trust. So, I might think about when I bought my car, or the day I'm thinking about, and there's some things you can't control as much as you might try. Surgery is one good example of that, right? Like, you could try to set the ascendant. Now, obviously you can do the moon for the day. Like if you want to avoid, you're having breast reduction surgery. I don't know where that came from, but you have breast reduction surgery. Yeah, you're going to avoid the moon in Cancer. Sure, you can do that for those 2.5 days where the moon is in Cancer or particularly. You can do that. But to kind of say, well, I want the moon in this particular place at this
Right.
ascendant.
At a hospital, you can't have them do the surgery at your desire at a particular minute.
Actually,
There's
no,
too much going
exactly.
on. And I've known women that have moved heaven and earth to try to get the doctor's birth chart, right? It's not, they don't just want to like it, they want to control, well, what does the doctor have in his chart? What's in my chart? And I think at that point, it's admirable, but you can also make a case, perhaps it's a misuse of astrology. So,
Yeah, or a misunderstanding of astrology.
Thank you, better word.
I don't think it works. It doesn't work classically. I don't think it works modern. So for instance, that would be better asked by a horary related to the competence of a doctor than just looking at his natal chart, because you could have his natal chart, unless you're going to be that thorough, which most people are not that way. But if you were going to look at his natal chart, then your chart, but then you would have to pay attention to his transits and your transits.
Exactly. Or he could have the wrong time. Maybe the nurse went out for a cigarette, right?
Right.
Back when nurses still smoked.
Right. So all those things, it's better to have a horary. And, that practice, like trying to figure out, I see a lot of people do it even in more speculative astrology, like related to gaming and things like that, or contests, where they look at, I saw an astrologer do this recently for the Super Bowl, look at the team's chart and the quarterback's chart and the other quarterback's chart, blah, blah, blah. Where it's like, yeah, it's like the same thing that some people do even with presidential elections. I don't think it works. What seems to work is we got the chart of the country, or one of the charts of the country that you want to use, matched with an ingress chart, mainly the Aries for the particular location or capital of the country. And then how that matches up with each individual or candidate's chart. That's it. Going between two candidates, you're not going to get it. And, I remember an astrologer kind of debating with me like, oh, when they thought Bernie Sanders would be president or the nominee. Now, listen, Jupiter's in Virgo. It's going to go toward a conjunction to his sun. It's going to be, I'm like, that could just be him having a good moment, or maybe seeing his grandchild. It could be any number of things. And it wasn't for the nomination.
Yeah. Let me ask you, is there ever a time when doing electional work for specific questions that you do look at an ingress chart? Or when do you know that you have to go further afield? Like and pull back to look at the election within a larger context?
That's a good question. The short answer is no, I haven't. When might I do that might be on the level of when I'm talking to a president.
All right, I think that could happen. My fingers
Inshallah, we'll see.
Are crossed.
But when I'm talking to someone who is in charge of more active forms of larger aspects of government than just themselves. But that doesn't mean one couldn't do it for an individual, but I think that was more reserved for kings and queens and royalty.
So your remark, as we come to a close of this Q&A, and I think we've gone beyond 20 questions. We're so we've outdone ourselves. I quoted Al H. Morrison, the great Al H. Morrison, one of the amazing astrologers of the 20th century. And well, he liked me. So
He lied to you.
right. So,
He lied to you, or he liked you?
No, he liked me. So there were people he did not like but he was quoting a very famous remark by Mark Edmund Jones and gave him credit. And Mark Edmund Jones said, "You don't cast a chart to determine whether or not you should eat breakfast. You consult your appetite." So there you have it.
Yeah. And I think that's, yeah. And I've had clients who like, what is the best day for me? It was a British client, so that's why I lapsed into a British accent. What's the best day for me to go to the dentist? I'm like, your teeth hurt? Yes. Okay. When you can get to the dentist. Obviously I understand that we might want to look at, mitigations related to Saturn and his chart and the election chart, but sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
Well, you gotta
and get
bite
it done.
the bullet.
Right.
And listen, it never even occurred to me to elect a time to go to the dentist, and I'm certainly going to try that. I mean, I know I shouldn't, but oh my God, I already feel better.
Oh yeah, no, he would call me for like, I have to see the I'm going to the chiropractor. Is this a good time?
There was a very famous astrologer who we all miss very much, whose daughter wouldn't get on a plane without her having the departure time chart checked. The other thing I think we'll have to give a shout out.
Whose daughter was that? Was that don't tell me, was it Robert Blaschke's?
No.
Okay.
We will have to give a shout out when you're giving the lecture to our departed member, Judy Buchan, who has left us. And hi, Judy, how's heaven? Who literally had gotten good enough with electionals. She was winning quite regularly at casinos and gambling, to the point where she said the difference is you can smuggle a cell phone in and have astrology apps. And as far as they know, you're just talking to your mother, right? And I mean, they would hassle her if she had a laptop. But once cell phones became powerful enough to work astrology programs, she began winning on a regular basis. So I don't suppose you've done any of that type of.
No, I have not. That's where I haven't, gotten into it. And different people have different measures. I would be curious to know what she uses her measure. Some people would use, particular Jupiter at an angle or things like that. Did she tell you her secret?
She was going to tell me and someone else. We were going to make like an appointment to have like a Zoom conversation
and
about it.
Left us.
Yeah. Well, listen, so just refresh my memory about the date and time of your talk. So anyone watching this that is still with us will have it in their mind.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that they've hung around that long. So it is going to be March 12th, and the time I have, this is mountain, so it's going to be a little different. I think it's 12 to 6:15. And obviously there's a break for lunch. So I think it's going to be about 4.5 hours.
All right. Well, this information will be given when the link is sent for this conversation. They'll get all the information in the email.
Yeah.
And well, listen, I want to thank you so much for making the time, for talking to me. I found it really interesting, and I hope about 15 or 20 of you who were sitting on the fence have fallen over onto our side of the fence, and we'll see you there.
Inshallah.
So, thank you so much, Sam. Anything else you'd like to say before we sign off?
It's always a delight to talk to you. So thank you, Scott. We've known each other for a long time.
Quite a while.
Yeah. So it's always a delight to talk to you. I'm having positive exchanges with my polarity during this time with Taurine.
Excellent.
So it's
right. And you're going to be at ISAR, yes?
Inshallah, yes. And NORWAC.
And NORWAC, what are you doing at NORWAC? Tell me quickly. Let's promote the hell out of you.
Solar arcs. and I'm giving the I guess the keynote address. So, and I'm participating in
Really?
a panel. Yeah.
What's the keynote address going to be about for those of us that
Oh
aren't
my
going to be
God.
there? Any idea?
I do, but I gave a lecture title, but right now you're putting me on the spot. I don't remember the actual title, but yes.
I understand. When will NORWAC be? Do we know?
Yeah, it's Memorial Day weekend.
Okay, great. All right, people, come to Sam's lecture online and then find a way to get to NORWAC.
Yes.
All right. Bye-bye, Sam.